Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, February 8, 1954. Deputy District Attorney Harlan Whitlock opened the manila folder marked Case Number 4387/42 and understood immediately that what he held wasn't theft. It was murder. Only the victim had been killed, not with a knife, but with paperwork. A man had been erased from existence with 3 pages of typed testimony, 2 witness statements, and 1 judge's signature on a conviction order. 7 years earlier, in 1947, Thaddeus Morton Ashford, a high school mathematics teacher, had been convicted of grand larceny and sentenced to 10 years at Western State Penitentiary. He never came home. The death certificate listed pneumonia, institutional care facility, in 1951. Harlan was 29 years old and had spent the last 6 years in the Allegheny County DA's office, reviewing old cases for potential miscarriages of justice. The Pennsylvania Bar Association had launched a review program after several wrongful convictions came to light. Cases where overzealous prosecutors had cut corners, where witnesses had lied, where evidence had been fabricated. The state wanted to clean house, restore public faith in the system. He'd been assigned 47 files to review. Most were straightforward: embezzlement, fraud, burglary cases where the evidence was solid if sometimes thin. But Ashford's case stood out. An ordinary property crime. Too ordinary for 1947, a year when the courts were still processing wartime black market cases and housing fraud prosecutions. Something felt wrong, and Harlan had learned to trust that feeling, the instinct that separated truth from manufactured narrative, the sixth sense that came from reading thousands of witness statements and learning to spot the telltale signs of fabrication. Harlan sat in his cramped office on the 3rd floor of the Allegheny County Courthouse. Outside, February sleet hammered against the windows with an insistent rhythm that matched his growing unease. The radiator clanked and hissed, barely keeping the chill at bay. On his desk sat a chipped coffee mug gone cold. He'd poured it 4 hours ago and forgotten to drink, and the folder that smelled of basement archives and someone else's tragedy. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed intermittently, casting harsh shadows across the documents spread before him. He opened the arrest report. ___quote_2___. Ashford had been 35 at the time of arrest. The inventory list followed. 2 men's suits, described as quality tailoring, likely Brooks Brothers. 3 pairs of shoes, Oxfords, wingtips, dress loafers. Sterling silver flatware service for 6, Georgian pattern, estimated value $200. A Swiss-made wristwatch, Omega Seamaster gold case. Women's jewelry, pearl necklace, diamond earrings, gold brooch. All allegedly stolen by Ashford from the estate of his recently deceased landlord, where he'd been employed part-time as an executor's assistant while teaching full-time at Shenley High School. Harlan frowned. A high school teacher moonlighting as an estate executor stealing household goods? Swiss watches from an estate inventory? The whole setup felt wrong. Teachers didn't typically have access to estate valuations, and why would a mathematics teacher be hired as an executor's assistant? What qualified him for that work? He dug deeper into the file. Witness statements. First witness, Estate Attorney Cornelius P. Dutton. __quote_4__. Second witness, neighbor from the same floor, Virgil S. Hempstead. __quote_5__. Harlan set down the page and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Even for 1947, this looked strange. Too domestic, too petty. The courts were dealing with serious post-war crime, veterans' fraud schemes, housing profiteering, black market gasoline operations, counterfeit ration stamps. Why would prosecutors waste time on ordinary larceny? Why commit resources to prosecuting a teacher for allegedly stealing some silverware and jewelry? Unless it wasn't about the theft at all. He picked up the conviction order. __quote_6__ Judge Millard K. Sanderson presiding. Signature, court seal, date, November 3, 1947. Everything procedurally correct. Everything perfectly false. Harlan stood and walked to the window. Below, through the sleeting rain, he could see sparse pedestrians hunched under umbrellas, hurrying along Grant Street. Cars crawled through the slush, their headlights cutting weak paths through the February gloom. An ordinary day in an ordinary city. But 7 years ago in this city, a man had opened his door one October evening and never closed it again. They'd taken him away, locked him up, erased him from the world. And his apartment remained, waiting for its new occupant. Harlan returned to the folder. Then he saw what he'd been looking for. The property seizure inventory, filed as an attachment to the conviction order. Listed separately was the apartment. 3 rooms, living room, bedroom, study. 900 square feet, 3rd floor, 427 Belfield Avenue, Shadyside neighborhood. Estimated value, $8,000. Annual rent, $600. __quote_7__. There it was. That's why. In 1947 Pittsburgh, housing was worth more than gold, more than money, more than almost anything else. The wartime industrial boom had brought thousands of workers from West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, men who'd come to work the steel mills and never left. Boarding houses were packed to the rafters. Families of 5, 6, 7 people lived in single rooms. The housing shortage was so severe that the city had set up temporary barracks in Shenley Park. But here was a 3-room apartment in Shadyside, one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city, occupied by a single unmarried mathematics teacher. Ashford lived alone. No wife, no children, no parents. Just him. A spacious apartment with high ceilings, hardwood floors, a view of the park. The kind of place families would kill for. Maybe someone had. Harlan took a fresh legal pad and began listing facts in his methodical handwriting. Subject: Thaddeus Morton Ashford. Born: April 12, 1912. Age at arrest: 35. Occupation: mathematics teacher, Shenley High School. Marital status: unmarried. Residence: 427 Belfield Avenue, apartment 3B, sole occupant. Arrested: October 15, 1947. Convicted: November 3, 1947. Sentence: 10 years, Western State Penitentiary. Died: March 14, 1951. Age 39. Cause: pneumonia. Accuser: Virgil S. Hempstead. Neighbor: same floor, same building. Provided witness testimony against Ashford. Question: What happened to him after Ashford's arrest? Question: What happened to the apartment? Harlan underlined that last question twice, because he already knew the answer would be ugly. He could feel it in his bones, the way a doctor feels a cancer before the X-ray confirms it. Next question: What happened to the apartment after the arrest? Harlan checked the seizure inventory again. Property remanded to Allegheny County Housing Authority for redistribution. Standard bureaucratic language. But redistributed to whom? And when? Harlan grabbed his coat, a wool overcoat that had seen better days but still kept out the cold, tucked the folder under his arm and headed out. He needed the county housing records for 1947 to 1948. If his hunch was correct, the new tenant was someone very specific. And that someone had left a trail, because bureaucracies always left trails. You just had to know where to look. The housing authority records were kept in the basement of an old building on Grant Street, 6 blocks from the courthouse. Harlan walked through the sleet, collar turned up, hat pulled low. The city looked gray and tired, the way it always did in February. Soot from the steel mills mixed with the sleet, turning everything the color of old dishwater. This was Pittsburgh in 1954. Still the steel capital of the world, still powerful, but starting to show its age. The war had been good to the city, but now peacetime was revealing the cracks. The housing authority building smelled of mildew, mice, and decomposing paper. The walls were water-stained. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling. Budget cuts had hit the municipal services hard, and it showed. The clerk, a wizened old man named Silas McGrath, who looked like he'd been working in basements since the Civil War, greeted Harlan without enthusiasm. Quote 9. His voice was a rasp, probably from 50 years of breathing basement air. Harlan showed his credentials. Quote 10. Silas squinted at the badge. The old man's face didn't change, but Harlan saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition? Unease? Silas sighed, a long, wheezing sound like air escaping from a tire. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 15, underscore, underscore. He led Harlan between filing cabinets stacked with folders, down narrow aisles that smelled like a tomb. Water stains darkened the ceiling. Harlan could hear mice scuttling in the walls. This was where the city kept its secrets, its mundane administrative secrets that could destroy lives. They searched for 2 hours. Harlan's hands became gray with dust, his nose itching from the mustiness. His eyes watered. Silas moved with agonizing slowness, pulling out drawer after drawer, muttering to himself. Finally, deep in the back corner where the ceiling leaked and the concrete floor was permanently damp, Silas pulled out a battered ledger from the depths of a rusted cabinet. Here, property transfers October through December 1947. He laid it on a table that wobbled on uneven legs. Harlan opened it carefully. The pages were brittle, spotted with mold. He ran his finger down the entries, reading addresses. Liberty Avenue, Penn Avenue, Fifth Avenue, Belfield Avenue. There. 427 Belfield Avenue. Let's see. Apartment 3B. The entry read, Property, 427 Belfield Avenue, Apartment 3B. Previous tenant, Ashford, Thaddeus M. Seizure date, October 16, 1947. Seizure reason, criminal conviction, property forfeiture. Reassignment date, November 15, 1947. New tenant, Hempstead Virgil S. Family size, 4. 2 adults, 2 children. Previous address, 1842 East Carson Street, Room 7, Ording House. Harlan's heart hammered. The neighbor, the witness, the accuser, the new occupant. Everything connected in a chain of perfect, damning logic. Virgil S. Hempstead had testified against his neighbor and received his apartment 12 days after the conviction. 12 days. Not 12 months, not 12 weeks. 12 days. Someone had processed that transfer with remarkable speed. In 1947, when the city bureaucracy was overwhelmed with housing applications, when families waited years for apartments, Hempstead had moved from a boarding house room to a 3-room apartment in less than 2 weeks. Simple, cynical, lethal. And in that moment, Harlan understood. This wasn't just an old case requiring formal exoneration. This was a living crime, still existing in this city, right now, 7 years later, behind someone's door. The crime hadn't ended with Ashford's conviction. It was ongoing. Every day Hempstead lived in that apartment, the crime continued. Harlan asked hoarsely. His throat was dry. Silas shrugged. Harlan said quietly. Silas looked at him for a long moment, then shrugged again. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 21, underscore, underscore. He disappeared into another room and returned with an old box camera. He photographed the ledger page, then wrote down Harlan's information. Photos will be ready in 3 days. You can pick them up here. I need them today. Can't be done. Lab's backed up. Harlan pulled out his wallet, extracted a $5 bill. Today. Silas looked at the money, then at Harlan. 6 hours. Come back at 5. Harlan returned to the courthouse. His office felt claustrophobic. He couldn't sit still. He paced, staring at the folder, at his notes, at the case that was unraveling into something much darker than he'd expected. He thought about the sequence of events. June to September 1947. Items allegedly stolen from estate, October 15, 1947. Ashford arrested October 16, 1947. Apartment seized November 3, 1947. Ashford convicted November 15, 1947. Hempstead moved in. The timeline was too perfect, too clean, like it had been planned. Harlan opened his desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of whiskey he kept for bad days. This qualified. He poured 2 fingers into his coffee mug, drank it neat. The burn focused his thoughts. Who else was involved? The estate attorney, Cornelius Dutton, obviously. He'd provided the cover story, the false claim about stolen items. But who had orchestrated it? Who had approached Hempstead with the offer? Because someone had. Men like Hempstead didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy their neighbors. They needed encouragement. They needed incentive. And in 1947 Pittsburgh, with the housing shortage reaching crisis levels, an apartment was all the incentive you'd need. Harlan checked his watch. 3 o'clock. 2 more hours until the photos were ready. He couldn't wait here. He needed to move, to keep investigating, to find more pieces of the puzzle. He grabbed his coat again and headed out. This time, his destination was Shenley High School. The school building loomed against the gray sky, a Gothic revival structure from the 1910s that looked like a castle. Harlan had attended public school across town, but he'd always envied the kids who went to Shenley. It was one of the best schools in the city, with a reputation for academic excellence. Ashford had taught here, had probably loved it here. Harlan found the principal's office. A brass nameplate read, quote, 27, quote. He knocked, quote, 28, quote. Principal Garrison was a formidable woman in her mid-50s, built like a battleship and with the demeanor to match. She wore a navy blue suit, sensible shoes, and no jewelry except a wedding band. Her desk was obsessively organized, papers in neat stacks, pencils lined up like soldiers. She looked at Harlan's credentials with the expression of someone who dealt with bureaucrats her entire career and wasn't impressed. A case from 1947? What for? Reviewing conviction validity, Harlan said. Thaddeus Morton Ashford. He taught here. Something flickered across her face. Not quite recognition, more like old pain resurfacing. Mr. Ashford. She said the name carefully, like it might break. Yes, he taught mathematics here from 1938 to 1947. 9 years. He was an excellent teacher. You remember him? I was assistant principal then. Of course I remember him. What happened to him was... She paused, choosing her words. Unexpected. Did you believe he was guilty? Principal Garrison's eyes hardened. She studied him for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to her office door, closed it. When she returned to her desk, her expression had changed, less official, more human. Quote 40, quote, she said quietly. Quote 41, quote. She spread her hands. Quote 42, quote. Quote 43, quote. Quote 44, quote. She looked surprised. Harlan wrote this down. A picture was emerging of the victim, a quiet, scholarly man who lived a modest, innocent life. The kind of man who wouldn't see the trap until it closed around him. After his arrest, did anyone from the school visit him, offer support? Principal Garrison looked down at her desk. I'm ashamed to say no. The superintendent forbade it, said we couldn't be associated with a convicted criminal. It would reflect badly on the school. So we abandoned him. The guilt in her voice was real. Harlan felt sorry for her. Can I see his personnel file? She hesitated, then nodded. Wait here. She returned 10 minutes later with a thin folder. This is all we have left. Most of his records were purged after the conviction. Harlan opened it. Employment application from 1938. Letters of recommendation. Teaching evaluations, all glowing. A photograph. Ashford was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, receding dark hair, a gentle face. He looked like what he was, a mathematics teacher. One document caught Harlan's eye. A memo from June 1947. __quote _53 ___. So Ashford had actually been hired as an estate assistant. That part was true. But why? How did a mathematics teacher end up working for an estate attorney? Quote 54, quote 55. The pieces shifted again. Ashford's landlord died. The landlord's estate needed to be settled. Ashford, as a tenant and someone the landlord trusted, was asked to help with inventory. A reasonable arrangement. But then items went __, quote _56 __. And Ashford was blamed, and convicted, and his apartment was taken, and given to the man who'd testified against him. Harlan closed the file. Thank you, Principal Garrison. This is very helpful. Are you going to reopen the case? He's already been exonerated posthumously. I'm just trying to understand what really happened. She looked at him with something like hope. If you find out he was innocent, truly innocent, will you let me know? I'd like to correct the record. Maybe create a memorial scholarship in his name. It's the least we could do. I'll let you know, Harlan promised. He left the school feeling heavier. The victim was becoming real to him, not just a name in a file, but a person. A good person. Someone who'd been destroyed not because of what he'd done, but because of what he had. An apartment someone else wanted. Harlan walked the 6 blocks to Belfield Avenue. He wanted to see the building, see the apartment, understand the geography of the crime. 427 Belfield Avenue was a handsome 3-story brick building from the 1920s. Well-maintained, in a quiet neighborhood lined with trees. The kind of building where professionals lived. Teachers, accountants, low-level managers. Respectable people living respectable lives. Harlan stood across the street, looking up at the 3rd-floor windows. Behind one of those windows, Hempstead lived, with his wife and 3 children. In Ashford's apartment, sleeping in Ashford's bedroom, eating in Ashford's kitchen, living Ashford's stolen life. Harlan felt rage building in his chest, hot, righteous anger. He wanted to storm up those stairs, kick down the door, drag Hempstead out and make him confess. Make him pay. But he couldn't. Not yet. He needed more evidence. He needed to be absolutely certain. He turned away and walked back downtown. By the time he reached Grant Street, it was 5 o'clock. Silas McGrath handed him an envelope with the photographs. That'll be $5. Harlan paid, looked at the photos. Perfect. Clear. Damning. He returned to his office and sat in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. The folder lay open on his desk, the photographs beside it. The evidence of a perfect crime. Tomorrow he would continue investigating. Tomorrow he would find the final pieces. Tomorrow he would make his decision. But tonight, he just sat in the darkness and thought about Thaddeus Morton Ashford, who had opened his door one October night and lost everything. The next morning, Harlan arrived at his office at 7. He hadn't slept well, kept seeing Ashford's face from the photograph, kept imagining the man opening his door to police officers, the confusion, the fear, the protests of innocence that nobody believed. He made a list of what he still needed. 1. Verify the estate inventory. Were items actually stolen? 2. Find out more about Cornelius Dutton. 3. Interview Hempstead. Maybe. 4. Make a decision. The first item took him to the Allegheny County Probate Court. The clerk, a harried-looking woman named Dorothy, found the Blackwood estate file after an hour of searching. Here, estate of Reginald J. Blackwood, deceased July 2, 1947. Probate completed January 1948. Harlan read through the inventory. Furniture, books, clothing, kitchenware. Standard household items. No sterling silver flatware, no Swiss watches, no pearl necklaces or diamond earrings. The estate had been modest, total value $3,200. Blackwood had been a retired postal worker, not a wealthy man. The idea that he'd owned expensive jewelry and Swiss watches was absurd. Harlan paid for copies of the complete inventory. More evidence, more proof of the fabrication. Next, Cornelius P. Dutton. Harlan went to the County Bar Association. The records librarian, an elderly man with thick glasses, pulled Dutton's file. Dutton, Cornelius P., admitted to practice 1935. Disbarred March 1948. He looked up at Harlan. You want to know why? Yes. Professional misconduct, fabrication of probate documents. He was representing an estate, not the Blackwood estate, a different one, and he falsified the inventory to hide assets from the heirs. Someone caught him, reported him. The bar investigated, found a pattern of misconduct going back several years. Disbarred permanently. What happened to him after that? Moved to Florida. Died there in 1949. Liver failure. Probably alcoholism. So Dutton had been a dishonest lawyer, willing to falsify documents for money. Someone had recruited him to provide false testimony in the Ashford case. And then, a year later, Dutton had been caught doing the same thing in another case. Maybe the pressure had gotten to him. Maybe he'd started making mistakes. Or maybe he'd just been an habitual liar who finally got caught. Either way, he was dead. No way to question him. Harlan returned to his office and spread out all his evidence. Housing transfer showing Hempstead received the apartment 12 days after conviction. School records showing Ashford was a respected teacher. Estate inventory showing no expensive items existed to steal. Bar records showing Dutton was disbarred for fabricating probate documents. It was overwhelming. Ashford had been completely innocent. The entire case had been manufactured to steal his apartment. Hempstead had testified falsely, Dutton had provided cover, and the courts, overwhelmed with post-war caseload, had processed it all without scrutiny. Ashford had been convicted in less than 3 weeks. From arrest to conviction, 19 days. No real investigation. No defense attorney worth a damn. Harlan checked the records, found that Ashford's court-appointed lawyer had been a recent graduate who'd later quit law to become an insurance salesman. It was a railroad job, start to finish. And now, 7 years later, Harlan held all the evidence. He could prosecute Hempstead. Pennsylvania law was clear. False testimony leading to wrongful imprisonment was a felony. Hempstead could get 20 years. But then what? Harlan walked down the hall to the DA's office. His boss, District Attorney Eugene Carmichael, was a political animal, more concerned with his conviction rate than with justice. But he was also the man who'd have to sign off on any prosecution. Harlan knocked. "Come in, Whitlock. What have you got?" Harlan laid out the case, showed him everything. Carmichael listened, smoking a cigar, his face expressionless. When Harlan finished, Carmichael leaned back in his chair. "So you want to prosecute a city employee for perjury from 7 years ago? False testimony leading to wrongful death. The victim's already been exonerated. Case closed. What's the point?" "Justice." Carmichael laughed, a harsh bark. "Justice? Whitlock, grow up. This guy Hempstead, he's got a family, right? Wife and kids?" 3 children, ages 12, 8, and 2. "So you want to destroy a family to avenge a dead man who's already been exonerated? How's that justice?" "He committed a crime. 7 years ago, and he's been a model citizen since, right? No other arrests? No problems?" "As far as I can tell." "Then let it go. Write your exoneration report, clear Ashford's name, and move on. We've got current cases that actually matter." "This matters. Not to anyone who's alive, it doesn't. Look, Whitlock, I get it. You're young. You still believe in right and wrong. But the world's more complicated than that. Sometimes you have to let old wounds heal. Prosecuting this guy won't bring Ashford back. It'll just create more victims. A wife who loses her husband, kids who lose their father. Is that what you want? Harlan didn't answer. Carmichael stubbed out his cigar. Quote 86 __. Harlan walked back to his office in a daze. His boss had just told him to ignore a crime, to let a killer, because that's what Hempstead was, a killer, walk free. But Carmichael wasn't wrong about the collateral damage. 3 children, innocent children. What would happen to them if their father went to prison? Harlan sat at his desk and stared at the evidence for hours. The February light faded. The building emptied. He was alone with his choice. He thought about meeting Hempstead face to face, confronting him, making him confess. But what good would that do? The man would deny everything. And even if he confessed, then what? Harlan would still have to decide whether to prosecute. No, he needed to see Hempstead first, see what kind of man he'd become, see if there was any remorse, any guilt, any humanity. That evening, Harlan went to 427 Belfield Avenue again. This time, he went inside. The building had no doorman, no security. He climbed to the 3rd floor, stood outside the unmarked door. Behind it, he could hear family sounds, children's voices, a woman calling someone to dinner, a radio playing. Ordinary life, normal American life. A family having dinner, built on a dead man's bones. Harlan raised his hand to knock, then stopped. What would he say? Hello, I'm here to tell you that your father destroyed an innocent man, and I'm going to destroy him in return? He lowered his hand, turned away, went back downstairs and stood in the courtyard smoking, watching the windows. At 7:30, a man emerged from the building, tall, thin, wearing a cheap overcoat and a hat. He walked with a slight stoop, like someone who'd spent too many years hunched over a desk. He didn't look dangerous. He looked ordinary. Harlan followed him. Hempstead walked 3 blocks to a corner tavern, went inside. Harlan waited 5 minutes, then followed. The tavern was working class, sawdust on the floor, smoke thick in the air, men in work clothes drinking draft beer. Hempstead sat at the bar, ordered a beer, lit a cigarette. He looked tired, worn down, like a man who'd worked hard all his life and was still just scraping by. Harlan took a seat 2 stools down, ordered his own beer, watched Hempstead in the mirror behind the bar. The bartender knew him. Quote 88, quote 89, quote 90, quote 91. But Harlan heard something in his voice, a flatness, like a man going through the motions. Hempstead finished his beer, ordered another. Harlan did the same. They sat in silence, 2 strangers drinking alone together. After the 3rd beer, Hempstead spoke without looking at Harlan. Harlan's heart jumped. What? I saw you outside my building. Then you followed me here. You a cop? No point in lying. DA's office. Hempstead nodded slowly, took a long drink. I figured it would come eventually. What would? Someone asking questions about the apartment, about Ashford. He said the name like it hurt. Harlan felt his pulse racing. You know what happened to him? Yeah, I know. Hempstead stubbed out his cigarette. I know exactly what happened. I was there. You gave false testimony. I gave the testimony they told me to give. He looked at Harlan for the first time. His eyes were hollow, haunted. You think I wanted to? You think I'm proud of what I did? I don't know what you are. Hempstead laughed bitterly. I'm a coward. That's what I am. A coward who was so desperate for a decent place for my family that I destroyed a good man. He ordered another beer. You here to arrest me? I don't know. Well, when you figure it out, let me know. He drank. They came to me in September 1947. 2 men. Said they could get me an apartment, a real apartment, not a boarding house room, if I helped them with something. They knew I lived next to Ashford. They knew he lived alone in a big apartment. They said it was a waste, 1 man in all that space while families were crammed into rooms. They made it sound reasonable, like I'd be doing the city a favor. What did they ask you to do? Say I'd seen him bringing packages home, expensive-looking packages. Make it sound suspicious, that's all. Just plant the seed of doubt. They'd take care of the rest. He stared into his beer. I was 35 years old. I had a wife and 2 little boys. We were living in 1 room, sharing a bathroom with 12 other people. My wife was pregnant again, and these men were offering me salvation. A real home, 3 rooms, kitchen, private bathroom, for my kids. So you said yes. So I said yes. God help me. I said yes. He finished his beer. They arrested him 2 weeks later. I gave my testimony. The lawyer gave his. Ashford never had a chance. The trial was a joke. 3 days and he was convicted. I moved into his apartment 12 days later. Did you ever think about what happened to him? Hempstead's hands shook as he lit another cigarette. Hempstead closed his eyes. Harlan wanted to hate this man, wanted to feel righteous anger, but all he felt was pity. Hempstead had destroyed himself as surely as he'd destroyed Ashford. He was living in a prison of guilt, and he'd been there for 7 years. Harlan asked. And there it was, the same question Harlan had been wrestling with. Harlan said. Hempstead looked at him with dead eyes. Harlan didn't move, couldn't move. Hempstead said quietly. He stood, dropped money on the bar. He walked out. Harlan sat at the bar, staring at his beer. The bartender came over. Harlan said. He paid and left, walked through the cold night back to his apartment, lay awake until dawn, wrestling with the impossible choice. The next day, Harlan did something he'd never done before. He went to see the children. He waited outside Shenley High School at 3 o'clock. The school day ended, students poured out. Harlan spotted the oldest Hempstead boy, tall, lanky, wearing a letter jacket. Virgil Jr., 12 years old and already looking like a young man. He walked with friends, laughing, carrying books. A normal kid, happy, innocent. Harlan followed at a distance. Virgil Jr. stopped at a corner store, bought a Coke, joked with the clerk. Then he headed home to 427 Belfield Avenue. The next day, Harlan watched the middle son, Dennis, 8 years old, walking home from elementary school. Small for his age, wearing glasses, carrying a stack of library books. He walked alone, absorbed in thought. When he got home, Harlan saw him through the window, sitting at a table, reading. The youngest, Marcus, he saw playing in the courtyard with his mother, a thin, tired-looking woman in her early 40s. The boy was laughing, chasing pigeons, full of innocent joy. 3 ordinary children, living ordinary lives. They had no idea their home was built on lies. They had no idea their father carried the weight of murder. Should they pay for his crime? Harlan went back to his office, sat with the folder, stared at Ashford's photograph. "What do you want me to do?" he asked the dead man. "What would serve justice? Destroying 3 innocent kids to avenge you, or letting your killer walk free?" The photograph didn't answer. Harlan thought about the law. The law was clear. Prosecute the guilty. But the law didn't account for collateral damage. The law didn't weigh the suffering of innocence against the demand for justice. That was left to him. He thought about Hempstead's words. Look at my kids and then decide if destroying their lives will balance the scales. Would it? Would putting Hempstead in prison bring Ashford back? Would it ease his suffering retroactively? Or would it just create more suffering? A different kind, but suffering nonetheless. Harlan remembered something his father had told him when he decided to become a prosecutor. __quote, _139 __. What did justice require here? For Ashford, punishment of his killer, acknowledgement of the wrong done to him. For Hempstead, accountability for his crime. For the children, protection from their father's sins. All three demands were legitimate. All three couldn't be satisfied simultaneously. Harlan sat in his office for 3 days, wrestling with the decision. He barely ate, barely slept. His colleagues noticed but didn't ask. This was his burden alone. On the 4th day, he made his choice. He wrote the official report. Case number 4387/42. Subject: Thaddeus Morton Ashford. Review finding: conviction obtained through falsified testimony provided by Estate Attorney Cornelius P. Dutton, deceased 1949, and neighbor witness Virgil S. Hempstead. Evidence shows no theft occurred. Items allegedly stolen did not exist in estate inventory. Defendant was innocent. Recommendation: posthumous exoneration. Further recommendation: no prosecution of living witnesses. Primary witness Dutton deceased. Secondary witness Hempstead. Prosecution would not serve justice interests given. 1. Victim deceased. 2. Defendant already exonerated. 3. Undue hardship to innocent family members. Case closed. He signed it, dated it, filed it. Then he took all his notes, the housing records, the personnel files, the bar records, the photographs, everything that proved Hempstead's guilt, and locked them in his desk drawer. Not destroyed. He couldn't bring himself to destroy evidence. That would be another lie, another cover-up. But locked away, hidden. A compromise with his conscience. He also wrote something else, a personal memo, not for any file, just for himself. I am not filing charges against V.S. Hempstead. Not because he's innocent, he's guilty as hell, but because prosecuting him would destroy 3 innocent children, ages 12, 8, and 2. I've decided their future is worth more than one dead man's justice. I may be wrong. History will judge me. God will judge me. But I've made my choice. Those boys deserve a chance to grow up without their father's sins hanging over them. I hope Thaddeus Morton Ashford, wherever he is, can understand. And I hope to God I'm doing the right thing. H.W., February 18, 1954. He locked this memo in the drawer, too. Then he walked out of the courthouse and went home. 3 days later, he received official notification that Thaddeus Morton Ashford had been posthumously exonerated. His name was cleared, his record expunged. A letter was sent to his last known relative, a cousin in Ohio who sent back a brief note. Thank you. Thaddeus would have appreciated this. And that was that. Justice, of a sort. But not really. 25 years later, Harlan Whitlock retired from the DA's office in 1979 at age 54. He'd had a solid career, a dozen high-profile convictions, a reputation for integrity, the respect of his peers. But the Ashford case haunted him until his death. In 1962, he'd seen young Virgil Hempstead Jr. in his Army uniform, home on leave, showing his younger brothers around downtown Pittsburgh. Harlan had watched from across the street as the 3 boys laughed together, ordinary young men living ordinary lives, and he'd wondered, did I do the right thing? In 1968, he'd read in the newspaper that Virgil Hempstead Jr. had been awarded a Bronze Star in Vietnam for heroism under fire. The proud father was quoted, __quote _143 __. Harlan had cut out the article, put it in the locked drawer with the Ashford files. In 1975, he'd seen Dennis Hempstead's name in the business section, hired as a civil engineer for a major bridge project. Another success story from the family built on lies. And in 1977, he'd received an invitation to speak at a ceremony establishing the Thaddeus M. Ashford Memorial Scholarship at Shenley High School. Principal Garrison, long retired, had finally made good on her promise. Harlan attended, gave a brief speech about the importance of justice and remembrance, never mentioned that he'd let Ashford's killer go free. Virgil Hempstead Sr. was at the ceremony. Harlan saw him standing in the back, tears streaming down his face. Their eyes met across the room. Hempstead nodded slightly. Acknowledgement. Perhaps gratitude. Perhaps just recognition that they both carried the same burden. Harlan never spoke to him, never confronted him, never told anyone what he knew. Virgil Hempstead Sr. lived in apartment 3B until 1982, when he and his wife moved to a retirement community in Florida. He died there in 1995, age 83, surrounded by children and grandchildren. His obituary described him as a devoted family man and longtime public servant who worked for the city of Pittsburgh for 34 years. None of his children ever knew the truth, except one. 2004, 50 years later. Virgil Hempstead Jr., age 62 and recently retired from a distinguished Army career, was going through his late mother's papers after her death. She'd kept everything: old letters, bills, photographs, documents spanning 6 decades of marriage. In a box marked Family Records, he found something that didn't make sense. A deed transfer document from 1947. The apartment on Belfield Avenue where he'd grown up. Original tenant, Thaddeus M. Ashford. New tenant, Virgil S. Hempstead. Effective date, November 15, 1947. Virgil Jr. frowned. His father had always said they'd gotten the apartment through a housing lottery, a lucky break after years in a boarding house. But this showed a direct transfer from a named individual. Why? He kept searching through the box, found old newspaper clippings his mother had saved. One from October 1947. Quote 146 __. He read it. Thaddeus Morton Ashford, 35, sentenced to 10 years for grand larceny. The article listed his address, 427 Belfield Avenue, apartment 3B. The same address, the same apartment where Virgil Jr. had grown up. His stomach dropped. He spent the next 3 weeks becoming an investigator. Went to the courthouse, pulled files. Went to the library, searched old newspapers. Went to Shenley High School, talked to anyone who remembered. Everyone who'd known Ashford said the same thing. Brilliant, kind, honest. The conviction never made sense. Virgil Jr. found the death certificate. Died March 14, 1951, Western State Penitentiary. Pneumonia. Age 39. Found the exoneration notice from 1954. Conviction obtained through false testimony. False testimony. Someone had lied. And 12 days later, his father had moved into Ashford's apartment. The pieces came together like a nightmare. Virgil Jr. went to the DA's office. A helpful clerk found case number 4387/42. But the investigation files were sealed. "I'm the son of one of the witnesses," Virgil Jr. explained. "I need to know what happened." The clerk hesitated. "I'm not supposed to, but let me check with my supervisor." 20 minutes later, an older prosecutor named Thomas Brennan came out. "You're asking about the Ashford case?" "Yes. My father was a witness, Virgil Hempstead Sr." Brennan's expression changed. Quote 153 quote. He led Virgil Jr. to an office, closed the door. Quote 154 quote. Quote 155 quote. Quote 156 quote. Virgil Jr. felt sick. Brennan sighed. Virgil Jr. sat in stunned silence. Brennan continued. Virgil Jr. went to the University of Pittsburgh archives that afternoon, asked for the Whitlock collection. The archivist brought him to a reading room, presented him with boxes of files. He found case number 4387/42. Opened it. Inside was everything. The housing transfer records, the false testimony, the evidence of his father's guilt. And at the bottom, Whitlock's personal memo. __quote _163 _ Virgil Jr. Read it 3 times. Tears blurred his vision. A prosecutor had looked at his 12-year-old self, a boy who knew nothing about his father's crime, and decided his future mattered more than justice for the dead. Had that prosecutor been right? Virgil Jr. thought about his life, his Army career, his Bronze Star, his children, his grandchildren. A good life, an honorable life. Would he have had that life if his father had gone to prison in 1954? Or would he have become something else, bitter, angry, damaged? He thought about his brothers. Dennis, the engineer with his successful career and happy marriage. Marcus, the factory foreman with his 3 kids and his little house in the suburbs. Good men, decent men. Would they have been good men if they'd grown up as the sons of a convicted perjurer? Maybe. Maybe not. But Harlan Whitlock had given them the chance to find out. Virgil Jr. closed the file, sat in the archive reading room for an hour, thinking. Then he made a decision. He would tell his brothers. They deserved to know. But he wouldn't make it public, wouldn't shame his father's memory, wouldn't destroy the family his father had protected with his crime and his silence. Instead, he would do something else. He went to the Shenley High School Scholarship Fund, made an anonymous donation of $50,000 to the Thaddeus M. Ashford Memorial Scholarship, wrote a note, __quote _164 __. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was something. He told his brothers that weekend. They met at Dennis's house in the suburbs. Virgil Jr. laid out everything, the documents, the timeline, the evidence of their father's crime. Dennis, now 58, went pale. Dad did that? Our dad? Yes. Marcus, 52, put his head in his hands. My whole life, everything we had, was built on a lie? Yes. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Dennis spoke. What do we do? We live with it, Virgil Jr. said, like Dad lived with it, like the prosecutor who let him go lived with it. We carry the weight. But we didn't do anything wrong, Marcus protested. No, but we benefited from what Dad did. We grew up in that apartment. We had opportunities because we had a stable home. Whether we wanted it or not, we're connected to this. Dennis nodded slowly. The scholarship. We should contribute more. I already did. 50,000. I'll match it, Dennis said immediately. Me too, Marcus added. They sat together, 3 brothers bound by shared guilt for a crime they didn't commit, trying to find a way to honor a man they never knew. 2023. 76 years later. Dr. Eloise Brennan was writing her doctoral dissertation on post-war housing fraud in American cities. Pittsburgh was her case study. She'd spent months in archives, reading old files, tracking patterns. The Whitlock collection at the University of Pittsburgh had been a gold mine. Harlan Whitlock had been meticulous, keeping records of every case, every decision, every doubt. Most of it was routine. But one file stood out. Case number 4387/42. And inside, the locked drawer contents, the evidence Whitlock had preserved but never used. Eloise read it all. The housing records, the false testimony, the prosecutor's memo explaining why he'd let the guilty man go free. She sat in the archive, stunned. This was more than a dissertation. This was a profound moral dilemma captured in documents. She wrote her dissertation chapter on the case, titled it, Justice versus Mercy, the Ashford-Hempstead Case and the Limits of Prosecution. Her dissertation was published by Oxford University Press in 2024 under the title Shelter and Sin, Housing Fraud in Post-War America. The Ashford-Hempstead case became the centerpiece. It was featured in legal ethics journals. Law professors taught it as a case study. Philosophers debated it. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran a feature story. The case that haunted a prosecutor, when justice and mercy collide. Some readers praised Whitlock's compassion. __quote _181 __. Others condemned him as a coward. __quote _182 __. The debate went viral on social media. #Ashford case trended for a week. People argued passionately on both sides, but no consensus emerged. Because there was no right answer. Epilogue, 2025. The Thaddeus M. Ashford Memorial Scholarship has now sent 73 students to college to become mathematics teachers. The endowment stands at $1.2 million, thanks to anonymous donations from the Hempstead family. Virgil Hempstead Jr. died in 2021 at age 79. His obituary mentioned his military service, his community work, and his dedication to educational causes. It didn't mention the burden he'd carried for 17 years after discovering his father's crime. Dennis and Marcus Hempstead are still alive, now in their 80s. They meet once a year at the grave of Thaddeus Morton Ashford. The city finally gave him a proper headstone in 2024, paid for by the Hempstead brothers, though they did it anonymously. They stand there in silence, paying respects to the man their father destroyed. The apartment at 427 Belfield Avenue has changed hands many times. Current residents have no idea of its history. It's just an apartment, nice, well-maintained, in a good neighborhood. But for those who know the story, it's something else. A monument to impossible choices. A reminder that sometimes justice and mercy cannot coexist. A testament to the weight of decisions made long ago by people trying to do what they thought was right. Harlan Whitlock never knew if he made the right choice. He died in 1998, still wondering. Virgil Hempstead Sr. never spoke about what he'd done. He carried his guilt to the grave. Thaddeus Morton Ashford never knew he'd been exonerated, never knew that decades later, his name would inspire young mathematicians. Never knew that his stolen life would become a case study in ethics. And that's the tragedy. Not just the injustice done to Ashford, not just Hempstead's crime, not just Whitlock's impossible choice. The tragedy is that justice and mercy are sometimes mutually exclusive, that doing right by one person means doing wrong by another, that the scales never truly balance. That's the American story, not unique to Pittsburgh or 1947, but eternal and universal. The story of how we try to be good when being good isn't enough. The story of how the past never dies, it just changes form. The story of how guilt passes through generations like a genetic trait. And the story of how sometimes the only thing worse than letting the guilty go free is destroying the innocent while pursuing them. 3 boys grew up to be good men because a prosecutor chose mercy over law. 1 good man died in prison because the law failed him. Who was right? We'll never know. We only know there's no answer that doesn't hurt. And that pain, that impossible, irreducible pain, is what we inherit when we care about justice in an unjust world. Forever.